attended council hearings in person. You tuned into our televised proceedings on Channel 13. Now you have the chance to listen to us on the radio as we demystify our work and the people who do it. This is not a council hearing. This is Hearing the Council with your host, Josh Gibson.
Thank you, deep voice person with a funky backbeat. Indeed, this is not a council hearing. This is Hearing the Council. You can't have a government without a council, so you can't have a government radio station without a council show. This is it. I'm Josh Gibson, Director of Communications for the Council. You may also know me as our voice on social media, including Threads now, at Council of DC. And I would like to welcome back for the 11th time, Ward 1 Councilmember Brianne Nadeau. Thank you so much for being back.
Glad to be here.
I have a number of family members I've never spoken to on purpose 11 times. So you're in quite an elite group that we've done this on purpose 11 times.
Interesting. I'm gonna have to think about all of the double negatives in there and see whether I really am in a good spot, but 11 times it is. I
assure you, it'll be the dirty dozen next time. How was Ward 1 Day at the Building Museum?
It was fun. It's always good to see everybody. We also had wards 4, 5, and 6 represented. So it was quite the council happening. And then there were also some great community partners there that are working on violence prevention and community engagement. So it was a great time.
And so they're like shiny, angular silver things this year, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yes, I believe the technical term is cootie catchers. You know, the things that you play with when you're a kid, made out of paper, like origami.
Messages kind of thing.
Yeah. But they're hanging from the ceiling, and then there's a ramp that you can go all the way up, and then at the top of the ramp, there's like loungy stuff, like kind of like bean bags, more like pillows.
And they're kind of like Instagram friendly.
Yeah, it's very Instagram friendly for sure. It's not a very time consuming exhibit, but it's pretty.
Okay, gotcha. Have not made it yet, but and with an older one, the impetus to immediately go is a little bit reduced. Back in the day.
Yeah, I actually think maybe do it when you want to look at some other exhibits too.
I see.
Because it's just such a quick stop. Unless you really just want to like take a book and sit up top and hang out while the light refracts, and you can just have a nice quiet afternoon.
Gotcha. Well, we're bookending this interview with chit-chatty summer activities, but in the middle we have two densely, critically important, meaty topics that we're going to talk about. So pardon the quick transition, but at the council's last legislative meeting, 2 of the topics that were front of mind and that you were sort of at the head of the efforts to address were the sexual harassment accusations against former Chief of Staff and Deputy Mayor John Falchicchio, and also addressing the public safety situation in the district. So we'll deal with those both hopefully today if we have time. Let's start with the response to the sexual harassment situation. Can you quickly catch us up to how we got to the point prior to you offering the legislation?
Yeah, I hate to give this too much more airtime. I'm happy to talk about the solutions, but in March, it was revealed that the mayor's top aide had left the government, and then it was subsequently revealed that there were at least 2 accusers who accused him of sexual harassment and a number of other things related to their on-the-job performance and responsibilities. So the mayor referred those investigations to her Office of Legal Counsel. That's an internal body in the executive branch that typically takes on, legal matters for the mayor and her team, and that could be a government issue or beyond. So anyway, that was how it transpired. And I had said at the time, and I think some others did as well, that this really needs to be an independent investigation. No matter what the results are, folks are going to have questions about how it was handled, because you can't investigate the top guy internally. It's just not a good practice. In 2018, the council rewrote the sexual harassment policy for our body, which was adopted in the last council period, where we refer out to independent counsel when these types of things occur. So it's definitely something we spend a lot of time talking to our staff about, talking with each other about its importance in protecting the institution and all of those within it, and ensuring that they have confidence in the process. And so, you know, given that the mayor made her decision to keep it internal, council members started talking about how we want to change that process. 10 of us introduced a permanent piece of legislation that would refer allegations against any mayoral appointee to outside counsel. And that has been referred to my committee, so we'll hold a hearing on that in the fall. But we also felt like we wanted to ensure that everything related to the mayor's top aide was fully investigated and addressed as well, because, you know, it's very rare that one person can get away with the types of things he was doing without anybody else knowing. And so what you know led to that situation, what led to it persisting. So the allegations were substantiated in the mayor's report, but many of the things that were alleged were actually considered out of scope, which also drew some criticism from all of us. So in our last council session, we moved an emergency bill that I authored that charges the inspector general with taking this on by hiring an independent investigator to review all of the things that the mayor's legal counsel have done, see if there are any gaps, see what might have been done differently. Hey, if that independent review says they did a great job, I wouldn't change a thing, that's fine. But I don't think that right now we have that assurance. And so we passed it unanimously. The inspector general worked with us to ensure he could absorb the cost to get us through what needs to be done. And also, if any additional allegations come up toward him, toward the top aide, then the inspector general will also refer those to the outside counsel. So that's where we landed. You know, as I said, it was unanimous. So it ended up being pretty uncontroversial among council members. And I believe the Washington Post called for the independent investigation. You know, I think there were some people here and there who said, you know, he's already left, you know, 2 allegations were substantiated up from the first complainant, you know, why do we need to do more? And for me, the answer is we need folks to know we're serious about this, and employees who have been impacted should know that there's a path for them to come forward where they can feel assured that this will be handled correctly.
Right. And I think what's interesting about how the legislation was crafted, and it speaks to the how important it is to craft things minutely and intelligently, which I think happened here. You don't want to start the investigation over. A, it's more expensive. B, it re-traumatizes the victims who have to once again tell a stranger what they went through.
That's right.
So my understanding of the way the legislation is drafted is you're investigating the investigation, 1. 2, in the letter from the mayor's office of legal counsel, they substantiated a couple accusations, and then a number of them they said are beyond the purview of what we were supposed to look into. So I believe the independent investigator is going to look into those other enumerated items that the report didn't opine on.
That's right. So yeah, you got it.
New claims that come forward subsequently.
That's right.
So
yeah, so I think we did the right thing here. And And we'll see. It may be that no one else comes forward and that's that. But it may be that some folks feel more comfortable coming forward once the independent investigators on contract.
And what is the end game of this? Is there a criminal element of this? Is there a law enforcement element of this? You know, clearly personnel codes and common decency and morality have been violated, but will there be a follow-on police investigation of this?
We don't know, but there absolutely could be. And that's why, for example, we didn't involve the Attorney General, right? Because if there are criminal charges and it implicates parts of our government, or he has to file criminal charges, it's just more complicated if this is with him. We gave it to the Inspector General. Now, the independent investigators, if they find something criminal, they're going to bring that back to the Inspector General, who then can also work to file charges. So there's a couple avenues here. I think we just don't know enough yet about what happened. Certainly, you know, we don't have all the details, and that's okay. You know, that's in a lot of ways, that's to protect the privacy of the victims here. But we do need the law enforcement entities to have all those details. So I'm hoping the independent investigation will assist with that.
And the other complicated angle of this that I really haven't seen anyone ask about is, this is someone that we all knew. This is, I didn't directly interact with him a great deal, but someone thought I was him once because we're both short-haired, doughy white guys hanging around the Wilson building. Innocently thought that I was him, but this is someone that council members routinely saw at events and met with, and that just adds, and the victims also are probably known to council members. And that just adds an additional layer of complication and trauma to this person. I mean, knowing how big, you know better than anyone, how big of a role he played in the government. And to see someone like that abuse their power so thoroughly is just upsetting.
Yeah, I mean, he was certainly ubiquitous. And you know, it is upsetting. I think any of us who've read the firsthand accounts, like the ones that the victim gave, I think it was maybe one in the city paper, one in the Post. It's just gut-wrenching to think that somebody who came to work to serve the people of the District of Columbia was treated that way. And I think it's great that at least two of the complainants have found legal counsel that's willing to work with them and help them through this process, and, you know, very, very reputable legal counsel at that. But I don't know, it upsets me as a steward of government that this happened. It's one of the reasons that I really pushed my colleagues back in 2018 to improve our policy, was because we were seeing the Me Too movement, you know, across the globe, and felt like our policy, which was the mayor's 2017 policy that's still in place, was just not sufficient for what our staff needs and what our staff encounters. And when we wrote our policy, staff were really the drafters. I mean, like most of the policies that we write. And it was a working group of folks that came together over a couple of years, really, to pull it together. We've consulted with outside firms that specialize in these types of workplace policies. But really, you know, the key thing here is a lot of what we're talking about is the after the fact. And it's really that training and the clear policy that prevents this work. And that's huge. So at council, we have an annual training done by a firm, and it's mandatory. And the mayor's policy is similar. It's when you are hired, and then every other year, which I think is also a reasonable time frame. One of the questions that I hope we get to in oversight this summer with Councilmember Bonds is, how many DC government employees are in compliance and how many aren't? And I'm also seeking to learn more about the type of training that is given to executive branch employees. So I actually I'm hoping to find the module in PeopleSoft this summer and try it myself and see how it compares to what we've contracted to do. Ours is very powerful.
Yeah, having taken it annually as required, it is. I mean, it's very well done. It's virtual, it's video, but it's very real life circumstances that you could picture, and in the gets into kind of the shades of gray elements where I think it's most helpful.
I think our training this year that took place just a few weeks ago was really powerful because of the timing of it. And it had been updated, I think, to reflect the situation that our government was going through as well, so that folks could really deeply understand why these scenarios were wrong and what to do, and also how to help if you see it happening. And I think that's a huge piece of it. You may not personally experience harassment, but if you see or know of someone who has, you have an opportunity and I think an obligation to help.
And people, I mean, we always talk about how, you know, the DC is the nation's capital and the capital of the free world. I mean, but DC government and local DC really is kind of a small town. And I feel like when things like this happen, Jack Evans' situation was similar. You know, it was someone we all knew the perpetrator, we all knew the victims, and that makes it a challenge because you know every single person involved, so you feel it even more deeply. It's a very tough situation when you see someone who you thought you trusted and that you shouldn't have.
Yeah, I agree. And I can only imagine how it feels for people in the executive branch that were working closely together with him, because, you know, their trust is the right word. You know, there's so much trust given to top appointees, and that trust was obviously broken.
Yeah. And there's a, you know, the articles speak about an element of, in the Evans case, that's just Jack, or in the Falchicchio case, that's just John. People knew, a fair number of people knew these kind of things were happening. I think that just makes it all the more painful to the victims. And
I think so too.
Important to get to the bottom of the investigations.
Right. And, you know, some of the investigation may reveal who knew what when, and I think that is really important for our governance structure as well.
Yeah, I would agree. So moving forward, the timetable you'd mentioned, the emergency bill, has that gone to the mayor?
That's a good question. I know the general counsel was doing all the enrollments yesterday furiously, so I am not sure if the emergencies have made it over there yet, because there were so many of them. But the mayor has 10 days once she has received them to either sign them, allow them to become law without signature, or veto them. She did indicate to the media she does not plan to veto this bill.
Right. And it was passed unanimously, so it's, to a certain degree, it's irrelevant.
That has not stopped her in the past. I mean, it certainly would hold it up significantly if she did make the choice to veto it, because we're in recess. So it wouldn't be implemented again until we could override in the fall. So it was just kind of like a nice relief that she has chosen not to do it, despite the fact that we could handily override it.
And then hearings on the permanent in the fall.
That's the goal. There is a referral to my committee right now with comments from Councilmember Bonds. And it sounds like they might decide to do actually a joint referral to Councilmember Bonds. They're still working that out right now, so we'll see. But I would plan to hold a hearing in the fall and invite the Executive Administration Committee to join.
Gotcha. Okay, well, we will keep an eye on that topic. Pivoting now to public safety. Again, this is something that action was taken at the last legislative meeting. Talk a little bit about the process there. You know, we had taken a system-wide look at the criminal code. passed it. Congress overturned it. The mayor came back with emergency legislation insisting that we address it before the recess. And we, took a more nuanced look at that and passed our own bill going into the recess. So why don't you kind of fill us in on where things are and how we got there?
Sure. Well, let me just start by saying, the increase in crime is very upsetting. It's not acceptable for any of us in government, and we're all working together to try to address it. Council over the years has made significant policy changes and investments in preventing crime. But at the end of the day, it's the executive branch that implements these policies, that runs the police force, that interfaces with our prosecutorial body, which is the U.S. attorney for the most part. And one thing that became real clear throughout this process is, council's working really hard here, but we're not seeing all of the tools being used by the executive branch that they already have. So for me, as a council member who's out in community all the time, talking to people who are afraid and want to see solutions, that's frustrating, because the mayor is real quick to point the finger at council members for policies that we have put in place, when the reality is our policies are smart, evidence-based, and are working when they're being implemented properly. So it's always an interesting dialogue. Now, the mayor had said she was sending down a bill. She kept talking about it, finally sent it down and said, now get it done. Of course, we were pretty close to recess at that point. To her credit, the Judiciary Chairperson, Brooke Pinto, Ward 2, held a hearing. I was there. It lasted 12 hours. And what we heard in that hearing was that some parts of the mayor's bill were quite dangerous and counterproductive. For example, detaining children when they had committed very minor crimes can actually make them worse, right? Instead of helping reform them, rehabilitate them, get them on the straight and narrow, what it does is it disconnects them from services, family, jobs, school, and even one night in juvenile detention can have a negative impact on somebody's trajectory. And so with the information the public brought us, and the information that we had from doing this work over the years, we knew we couldn't pass the mayor's bill as is. Councilmember Pinto then put forth an alternative emergency bill, which really narrowed some of the things that the mayor asked for. One of the things she moved forward in that bill was expanding the camera rebate program, which the council established when I was a freshman, and that has been well implemented by the mayor. Another was adding pretrial detention options for our most violent offenders. So that allows the U.S. attorney and judges to hold somebody if they have probable cause that that person really did commit that crime. And that can help with some of our most violent crimes. And that's really where the public has narrowed in their focus, is how are we getting these violent acts under control? So we did some good work on that. Some other council members contributed to the emergency bill. Councilmember Allen put forth some data collection measures and some public awareness measures, and Councilmember Robert White added some work on gun violence in particular. So in the end, council passed a bill that I think is useful. However, what we need from the mayor is a couple things that she can do anytime without legislation. One, we need that crime lab back up and running. I talk to police all the time. They're just despondent that they're gathering evidence that's just sitting in a box and not being tested, which could be closing cases. Two, we know police are not equitably distributed throughout the district. So what do I mean by that? You have more cops than you need in places with very low crime and fewer cops than you need in areas with very high crime. And that's a huge problem and something they could fix now. This is not a we don't have enough cops. This is a we're not putting cops in the right place. And I just spoke with the newly appointed chief this week, and this is something she says she's going to be focusing on, which is great. I'm glad they're hearing us on this. And then the other thing to remember is, we've seen crime come down in cities all across the country in ways that it really hasn't for the district. And so if you want to ponder, why is that the case and what's different? I think the real big difference here is that our crimes, the majority of our crimes, especially our violent crimes, are prosecuted by our U.S. attorney, who is appointed by the president and is not accountable to anyone in local government, has not been elected by anyone living here, has not been appointed by anyone, elected by anyone living here except for the president. And so that leads to a lack of accountability. And in this case, we're seeing our U.S. attorney is only prosecuting a third of the crimes that come to him. And even of those, about 40% of them get dropped, which is wild. Now, we have a locally elected attorney general who prosecutes a smaller percentage of the crimes, meaning there's a smaller percentage of crimes that are under his jurisdiction. And of those, he only declines 26%. So it's not that you can't prosecute crime in the District of Columbia. It's that we need accountability from our federal prosecutor, because it is surely the case that when folks don't feel as though there's going to be swift justice, they feel very comfortable committing crimes over and over again. We know that the best way to deter crime is swift arrest and prosecution. Has very little to do with sentencing, which is where a lot of our attention has been focused over the past couple of years. Swift arrest and prosecution takes no legislation. It just takes work. And so that's really what we need. So we got the council bill. We're putting pressure on the executive and the feds to do more. We've got a new chief of police starting. I believe that there'll be a confirmation hearing for her in the fall when council returns. And then we've got all of the work that council's been doing with our prevention programs. And you'll see, especially in the summertime, our Care the Streets programs, our violence prevention programs through the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. You've got the Summer Youth Employment Program. You've got our community collaboratives out there. And that's the work that keeps our kids active and safe in a positive way. And that's a huge part of the work that needs to be done. So that's what we're up to.
So combining a couple of the things you raised, hasn't the U.S. attorney said that the reason he's not prosecuting certain crimes is because of the situation with the crime lab? Some of it, yeah. And then he also refers to body-worn camera footage, which his comments have not been very detailed, but the way they come across, it's almost as if once he views the footage, it occurs to him that he is not confident he can make the case in court. So that could be an issue with police oversight, right? Also, there was a story that just came out about the police district in Ward 8, where a whole bunch of officers were collecting weapons, but not logging them or not making arrests when they got the weapons. There's a whole scandal really about all of this. And that unit, I believe, has been offline ever since those revelations, end of last year, maybe. So Ward 8 has been down people power as well. So there's a lot of problems here. We're here to do oversight, but this is all under the mayor. And so it's challenging when I go out in community and people are saying, well, the council's not doing this, the council's not doing that. I promise you that as council member, I'm doing everything I can, but we have not had a strong partner in the mayor in implementation. And that's a huge challenge because you know what? I don't want to point fingers. I just want the work to get done. But I'm going to be honest with you about who's not doing the work. Yeah, I mean, back when the NEAR Act was passed with the public health approach to public safety, that was just a multi-year battle that we passed it. It became law. but then it didn't get funded for year after year after year. And then we forced funding back in each budget cycle. The mayor didn't want to set up violence interrupters, so we ended up doing it alternatively through the Attorney General's office, and then eventually she set up a parallel office. You know, you spoke to this at you and the chairman both had very lovely, salty rants at the mayor at that meeting. Why does it have to be so hard?
I don't think that it does, Josh. Truly, I do not. And you know, I try not to think too hard about where we would be right now if our violence prevention programs had been implemented with fidelity and with adequate funding. I think we could have saved a lot of lives. And in all the years that we were fighting to try to get these programs implemented, the mayor would just come up with sort of like a knockoff version, you know, whether it was People of Promise or Building Blocks or all these programs where she's kind of pulling people off their jobs to work with those engaged in violence. And there was no need for that because we already had the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, and we already had Cure the Streets. Council ended up creating a director of gun violence prevention. That job kind of got swept into another portfolio, which is a classic move of the Bowser administration, is giving someone multiple roles, multiple very important hats to wear. So yeah, I mean, I get really frustrated because, you know, when I'm out in community, people don't care whether it's my responsibility or the mayor's responsibility to get this done. They see me, I'm here from the government. And, you know, they assume I'm part of the problem because things haven't gotten better in the way that they want to see it. And so it's a challenge. And I think I just finally got fed up with being blamed for all of her inaction. And so I've been getting salty, as you say.
Because I mean, it must be odd to compartmentalize your relationship because, again, it's a small town, it's a small government comparatively. You have to see the mayor all the time. You have one-on-one meetings, you have community, when you're out in community, and sometimes you're cutting ribbons on things that you both think are a great idea, and other times I assume you're behind closed doors and getting into it over something like this that you legitimately disagree over. That must just be hard to have sort of 10 relationships with the same person, depending on the day and the time and the mood at the moment. And the chairman is even worse in this circumstance, that you're constantly working with this person and sometimes you get along super well and other times you're totally at your wit's end with them. How do you have a relationship like that?
I mean, I think that's why for so long I tried to just be cordial and not so vocal about her failings, because at the end of the day, I've got to work with her. But, you know, I realized around the beginning of this year that we really just haven't been working that well together, and I need to do what I need to do for my constituents and not worry about how she feels about what I say, because, you know, at the end of the day, I'm accountable to my constituents and I have to show up and tell them the truth about things. And so that's how I do it. And, you know, I think as a peacemaker and a public servant, you know, I prefer not to burn bridges or upset people with my words, but sometimes you just have to speak truth. So.
And I mean, as a person who does communications, how from a communication standpoint does the council turn this around? Because you've made a point, it's U.S. Attorney, massive failings in the U.S. Attorney's office. When we have returning citizens coming back who show up on our doorstep, we could set up systems to accommodate them and welcome them. They don't. The feds just drop them off and we find out about it usually after they've offended again. And everything you've said about the mayor, but it's sticking. When people say, oh, the council, they needed to fix this and they didn't, or they made it worse with the criminal code revision. How do we turn that communication? That's the least of our worries. And we want to turn on the public safety issues first. But from a communication standpoint, how do we try to turn this around?
I think we just need to keep saying the truth and hope people are listening. And, you know, you've heard the chairman and I now get really fiery about this. And I think people heard that and are listening to that messaging. And I'm really just trying to share that with my constituents now whenever they contact me. I mean, I talk to hundreds of people a week from Ward 1, and whenever they share their concerns about public safety, I respond to their specific concerns, but also provide that additional context for them so they know where they can engage. And by the way, this is very much a statehood issue. So because of our lack of statehood, the U.S. attorney is the one who prosecutes the majority of our crimes, or some might say doesn't prosecute the majority of our crimes. If we had statehood, if we were in control of our own justice system, then we would have an accountable prosecutor, period. So statehood is not just about Congress meddling here and there on things that people care about, but, aren't life and death. I mean, they already meddle in a lot of things that are life and death, like needle exchange and abortion, but, I digress. This is literally our day-to-day operations. It's our day-to-day operations that aren't being handled in the best interests of the people of the District of Columbia because we are not a state. And ironically, Congress is calling our leaders to hearings to talk about violence and public safety in the district and blaming us. Well, I mean, that's some irony for you.
And to your earlier point, with crime turning around in other jurisdictions, but not in DC, it's not us. I mean, cities are cities. Most of our cities are run by progressives, so there's nothing in what we're doing that is different than what other cities are doing, essentially. But the results are starkly different, and our crime situation is not turning around. And to your point, all those fingers are pointing at federal meddling, our lack of control, and the lack of statehood. Unless someone comes up with a better theory, but that's the best one that I'm aware of.
I think it's at least a factor. And I mean, you can't look at that prosecution rate and not be stricken by how inadequate it is. You can't look at, the widely held knowledge that deterring crime is best done by arrest and prosecution and not see a connection. So is that everything? No. I mean, there's other things going on, with youth crime, for example, like, various TikTok challenges, the Hyundai Kia challenge, that's certainly contributing, and that's happening everywhere. But when it comes to the actual arrest and prosecution part, we are falling down, and you absolutely can draw a straight line to the U.S. attorney.
Yeah. So we're basically out of time. Another pivot to something less serious, and then what we've done. And all of my fun end of show things, because you've done 11 interviews, I've used up all the pre-scripted ones. So this is just a curiosity. So summer movies. Are you an air-conditioned theater person, or are you a screen on the green outdoor movie person?
Oh, that's such a great question. So when I first moved here 21 years ago, screen on the green was my thing with my friends. We would go every week. We'd go right after work and set up a picnic, and it was amazing. And I remember just loving it. It was such a cool thing and so much great community. And I'm telling you, climate change has ruined outdoor movies for me. It is so much grosser and hotter. I was saying this to my husband the other day, and he was like, come on, Brianne. And I was like, no, look it up. And he goes, oh, it actually was several degrees cooler when you first moved here. So you're not making that up. So I do enjoy air-conditioned movies. I took my daughter recently to see a movie in the theater, my older daughter, Zoe. So it's only her second one. The first one she saw was Frozen 2, and it was right before COVID. And then she didn't get to see a movie again until just last month. And I took her to see the live action Little Mermaid, which she loved. But next weekend, I'm going to see Barbie with my grown-up friend, not with my children.
That was my closeout question, was if you were Barbie, Oppenheimer, or both, or neither.
I'm sure I'll probably see Oppenheimer, but I grew up on Barbies. I love them. And I've even got a costume ready for one of my favorite Barbies, which I'm sure we'll share with the public at some point.
Yeah, at some point. Well, again, thank you for being generous with your time. Sorry for the transitions from fun to serious to fun, but got to try to squeeze it all.
That's what we do at the council. We got to be versatile.
Yeah, it is true. It is true. So thank you, honestly, from the bottom of my heart for coming back once again. And listeners, thank you as well. Remember to subscribe on SoundCloud to our podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. Search under Hearing the Council. Thanks again for joining us. Tune in next time. We're on DC Radio at 96.3 on our FM HD4 dial or at dcradio.gov. I'm Josh Gibson. This is not a council hearing. This is Hearing the Council. Thank you. Take care.